All right, welcome back for part number 2. This is chapter number 5, the CSIS 2200, Managing Information Systems. And we left off talking about different ways of security threats and that you should be aware of. And here's another one called sniffing. Now, sniffing is a term where they're trying to capture or record network traffic. They're just sniffing around to see what traffic is whipping through the network. So that's when you're working on your computer and the information is going from your computer to a server, and someone's capturing the information in between you and the server. And I put up a link here, and let me just open that up. All right, and the link I put up is the Wireshark again. So sniffing this is basically a sniffing tool. If you were to download this software tool and use it, you can actually sniff around to see who's sending what over what network. And I've played around with this tool myself, and I've used it to test out to capture my my neighbor's router's password. So what can I do with that? Well, I can go back and I can log on to their router, and I can start making configuration changes to their router. I can make an account on their router so I can access it without them knowing until they reboot their router. So or if I was at a laptop in a coffee shop, I could sit there and sniff and see who is sending what where. And most people go into a coffee shop, they're really not thinking about who's sniffing around for their data. They just see it because they can't see this stuff. This is all over the internet. So sniffing just allows you to capture and record network traffic. Usually it's wireless traffic. To capture network traffic on a LAN, a local area network, you need to be able to plug into the network. And that's a lot more difficult and requires special hardware. And there's usually security measures in place to do that. So again, don't surf and do online banking when you're at Starbucks. There's some good advice. Spoofing. All right, let's have a look at spoofing. If you're spoofing, you're acting as somebody else. And one way from the user's point that we can do this to protect ourselves is we can spoof our own location so that hackers don't know where we are, and by using a virtual private network. This is not a real network. It's virtually you're sitting somewhere else. And there's a lot of tools you can go out there and use. Now, there's a lot of free VPNs out there, but a lot of times you get what you pay for. ExpressVPN is probably the best one that I've used. And there's a whole bunch here that you can do some research and look at. I would definitely encourage you guys to look at having a VPN if you guys are really concerned about your security. One thing I've done with this that I found very interesting was I was booking an airline ticket, and I went to the website and I was looking at a ticket, and then I went back the next day and the price had gone up. And the reason it had gone up is because the company knew who I was because they had my cookie. And they knew that I hadn't bought the ticket. So then they raised the price, giving me the impression, well, the prices are going up, you better buy. So what I did was I spoofed myself by running ExpressVPN from a different location, and they didn't have the right cookie. So therefore, I was able to go back and get the original price. And it's a trick that the airlines do all the time. And you might have run across this. If you guys ever check out a price of an airline flight, and the reason they do this is it's a strategy I think the airline uses to try to entice people to buy the ticket, or they keep raising the ticket every time you log in. If you don't buy it right then, they raise it. Now, that might not be the case in all situations, but I've actually experienced this, and I've talked to other people on the phone. As I'm doing it, they get a different price and I get a different price. It's because I've already been to that website. So you can spoof it, which is kind of a neat way of avoiding those traps. So it's kind of the opposite direction. That's almost the consumer spoofing the company to get a better price. All right, here's I got a video here on computer fraud. So if you guys want, you can have a look at that. There's a little video here. All right, this is the movie I was talking about, the hacking movie. You guys can click on it and watch. It's only 2 minutes, but it basically shows kids back in the 80s and an old computer system and hacking into their school to change their marks, which is kind of a fun it's a fun story. And they're doing this, without authorization, obviously. I mean, ultimately, I guess people would like to be able to just hack into their different sites and then change their grades or hack into a bank account and increase the amount of money they have. Of course, that would be fantastic. Now, here's some other crimes that happen. Denial of service attack, DOS. Now, this is something that I've been a victim of myself, actually. I used to run a file transfer protocol server, a file server, and I was infected by a denial of service attack that infiltrated my computer, and it used my computer to attack other computers. And that's what a denial of service attack is all about. You can click on this link here to read more about denial of service attacks. It was primarily used because what they do is they infiltrate hundreds of servers around the world, and then they coordinate a time at a particular time and date to attack a website. So they might want to attack Google by having hundreds or thousands of these servers going and attacking Google servers. And attacking means to just ping their servers. It means just try to open Google, and they send out so many requests from so much the Google servers crash, and they basically bring the company down. And there's been some serious cases of this in the United States. All right, a couple other ones are identity theft and software privacy. And I put up a couple links here that pertain to that. Of course, identity theft. I've been a victim. I think I've mentioned that in one of my other videos of identity theft, and it's quite problematic, to say the least. It really impacts a person's financial health. Software privacy as well. I put in a link into this one as well if you guys want. There's actually, I just pointed you to the Wikipedia page on identity theft and on privacy, on software privacy. Distributing child pornography. I'm not sure what this was. I guess this is one of the crimes that's out there. Child pornography, email spamming. This is another one that it's hard to catch these people because you can create a server virtually, and so it's so hard to catch these people by sending out spam. But the browsers and email clients nowadays have pretty good spam detectors, and you can block them pretty easily. So this has been less of a problem over time. Another behavior that computer criminals do is spreading malicious code. So they'll put in code into a program, and that basically hurts your computer. I've written a sample one of these in Visual Basic for application. You can write a simple malicious code inside of Word, and it's not that difficult. Let me show you how that's done. All right, this is the programming language behind Microsoft Word. This language is called Visual Basic, and it's embedded in Excel, PowerPoint, and it brings up a computer model like this. But I won't write the exact code, but it would be something like this. So you could say basically once someone opens up a document, you want to run the code that will delete someone's C drive and delete from the root directory basically all the files and all the extensions without breaking. So what that will do, now that's not a correct statement, it's like pseudocode, but basically what would happen is when the person opens up this Word document, it will automatically run this script, and it'll take a person's computer, their C drive, and completely delete it. So you could imagine what that would do to your computer. It would basically wipe all the software, and you'd lose everything on your computer. So it could be down to like literally one line of code that can be embedded into a Word document, or it could be done into a PowerPoint presentation or an Excel spreadsheet. You can simply just write the code and create your own malware. Now, I'm not professing that you guys do that, of spreading malicious code and something like that. I'm just saying that this is something that can happen. So when you're opening up a Word document and they ask you the message, do you trust who you get this from? You really have to ask yourself, where did you get it? Did you get it off of the internet? Was it just some random file? If you did, you may want to run it through an antivirus checker to see if it's got malware on it, because it's so easy to do that. Another one that used to be very common a long time ago was these screensavers. They used to have these really fancy screensavers that people would download, they install on a computer, and what they didn't realize is that there was code in the background that was sending all of their data to another computer. So it was they were spying on people, basically, is what was happening. Now this one's a little more at the higher end, the espionage, I guess. You might stealing files for industry espionage or changing computer records illegally. These are, I think, a lot more difficult. Virus hoax, this is another kind of crime. People can put up a message on your screen that says your computer was just hacked, scaring people, shutting it down, but it's just a hoax. I've seen a couple of these. They're easy to write. I don't advocate writing them by any stretch of the imagination. Sabotage is the one I just showed you, where you can actually write some malicious code to sabotage someone's computer. So there's all these different crimes that are out there, as you can see here. This is another one that's been quite common. It's called ransomware. And basically they infect your computer and they shut it down, and they have a code that you cannot run your computer unless you enter the code in. So they give you a website. You can go to the website and you have to enter your Visa card in and pay them $69.95, and they will send you the code that will unlock your computer. And there's not much you can do about it once your computer's been affected. So that's a very diabolical way of holding your computer hostage. Ransomware, there you go. And there's a site that you might want to look at here. The government of this is a United States site on ransomware, explaining it in more detail. All right, so what do you do about all of these attacks? Now that you guys have seen some examples of all these different categories of attacks and what they can do, well, there are comprehensive, security systems in place that you guys can do to protect an organization's resources. Douglas College, we do have a couple of people that specialize in network security, and it is their job to safeguard our networks. Because if our networks go down, our business goes down. Think about it, if Blackboard went down, we wouldn't be teaching online. It would have a catastrophic impact on our business. So, who would want to do that? There are people out there that might want to do that. So we want to keep those intruders and hackers at bay. So there's different ways of doing this. We've got people, we've got physical hardware, computers that are helping us. We have software tools that are doing this. We have procedures in place to help us with this. And again, our personnel, which is probably the most important in this whole thing, is the people involved in helping stem these types of attacks. So there is a 4-tier levels of different security system measures that most companies take. Now, on a personal level, we usually don't have a hardware device that protects us, but in a company level, we do. We have an actual server, a security server that checks all sorts of things when data is traveling. A lot of software. I just showed you earlier the Microsoft Security for antivirus. Procedures are methods and things that the company does to help protect. For example, they only give out access to certain information to certain people that need it. And one of the procedures is to give as little information to as few people until they absolutely need it. So I run across this problem all the time. I needed a copy of all of faculty names to do a report, and they said, why do you need it? So I had to get authority. I had to send the authority to a higher level, and then they sent me just that information, and then they cut they stopped me from accessing it further. So there's very tight regulations, because once a company has been breached, the company's integrity is at fault here. So it's so important. And especially as a user, you guys have to be aware of this. The book goes through a theory that companies, security managers kind of look at. It's called the CIA triangle. So what they do is they always keep in mind, so they might ask you, like, what is one of the network security protocols that could be implemented within a company? And you could answer that question by saying there's a CIA triangle. And the CIA triangle refers to C for confidentiality. So that the data, like what data is confidential and who should have it. So another one in the triangle is its integrity, keeping the data and it's in place, intact, and having it strong integrity, so the data isn't corrupted. And then finally, who has availability to the data? So who should have access to what data? So these are three fundamental key areas or aspects of network security that security managers look at on a regular basis to help safeguard their networks. All right, another theoretical framework by which network security managers follow, another one is called this McCumber Cube. And the McCumber Cube, it basically follows a framework for evaluating information security. So that means when you're the security manager uses this this cube to sort of look at how the different aspects of the security within the companies are organized. So they look at the framework for evaluating. So it is a framework, and it's represented as what they refer to as a three-dimensional cube, in which you'll have a look at here. It defines 9 characteristics of information security. So what it has to do is it has to look at there are different states in which information exists within a system. So for an example of that would be when a student comes in and they ask them, okay, who are you? They're just starting to type that information into the system. That's one state of information that has to be protected. From there, as a student progresses through the college, they start taking courses and they start getting grades, and it starts accumulating the data on that record. So it evolves into different states, and it needs to be protected at different levels. So the information that is being protected at the beginning stage is very different than the data that's being stored at the last stage. So the transmission of data is how is the data transmitted from one system to another system is, again, part of the framework that has to be looked at, because that data being transferred, who has access to it and what's going on with that data. Storage, another key component. Once data is accumulated and even transformed into information, it has to be stored. And those storage repositories are targets for cyber criminals, I guess, who want to get in there and they want to have a look at that. Now, if it's student records, I wouldn't see that as being a big target, because I can't see that as being very valuable to too many hackers. Processing the data, again, taking the data, taking it out, and then processing it into information to produce something like a student transcript. Now, a student transcript would be the processed data that came from another stored data set. And again, that would be another component, another level that needs to be considered to be protected, or who has access to that. So some people might have access in transmitting the data, and different people might have access to storing the data, and then again, other people would have access to that processed data. Like, first of all, I cannot get access to student transcripts. Faculty have access to the stored data, but they don't have access to student transcripts because there's no need for an instructor to have access to that. So if you put it together, in theory, this is a nice kind of academic model for looking at an organization's security and their data in their managing information system, and looking at the 3 top levels of transmitting data, storing the data, and processing the data, keeping it confidential, keeping it intact, and making it available to key people. What other factors are involved here? Well, there's a human factor, of course. There's policies the company has and the practices that it implements, and also the technology that they use. So putting it all together formulates sort of a model by which a company can use to help protect and secure their data. So if you were going on and to become a data security manager, you would be studying all of these different intricacies and how they relate to each other, and all the tools and procedures. And this is basically, in a nutshell, this is really what a security manager encompasses. This is what they do in kind of a very broad base. So as a user, it's good for you to understand who the security manager is within your organization and what are they doing, what is their role, and how does your role interact with them. So you would interact probably with the procedures, with processing data in a managed information system. You're probably given certain availability to the data or to certain data, and you're using certain technologies. You also have to follow some policies and practices, and of course you are the human factor in this equation. So you do have ties to these other ones. Like you will have access to storing the information, sending it to other people. You have to have a certain amount of confidentiality. You have to keep your data integrity. But there'll be at different levels for different people with different roles. All right, let's have a look at some different levels. I think I mentioned this before. There's different levels of security within an organizational structure. And where do you fit into it? Well, there's level 1. They're talking about the front end server. So this is the server that you're connecting to. So if you're connecting to, let's say, an email server, you're probably going to have some sort of lightweight protocol, access protocol that's going to be implemented. This is your authentication. This is how you connect. So that's the first level of security. If you think about it, when we ask you to log into any system, we ask you for a username and a password. Those are our the keys to accessing the server. Now, there's also what they call an SSL, which is the secured socket layer. Now, just to sort of explain that, Wikipedia talks about this lightweight directory access protocol on how to access the server. And then if you typed in SSL, this is that secured socket layer of protocol. Now, you guys probably think this is getting kind of technical, but where you see SSL all the time, this is something that's from the user point that's very important, is up here in the URL, the Universal Resource Locator. Every time you guys type in an address, like you type in even something as simple as google.com and push enter, what happens is you'll notice up here that the communication, when you first level communicate with a server, I'm talking to the Google server right now, and I'm using the client right here to talk to them. It sets up the secure socket layer. It's an extra layer of security that provides me so that anybody in between cannot sniff out what I'm doing. Now that means the data that's traveling from my computer to the Google server, nobody can see it because it's being encrypted. But it still could be, somebody else could still see it if they had a keyboard logger, for example, on here. So you have to see that there's multiple facets to where you're entering the data in. All right, so that's kind of an example of the first level front-end server access to protect against unauthorized access. So that just means that people just hit the front door and they just can't get in. Now the back-end system is when you get a higher level of intrusion, and then that's where we need software to sort of stand guard. So there's the second level here is where we have software, and on our personal computers we have antivirus software. On our office computers they have that, and the servers they have that, and that's to protect it and assure against this data confidentiality. You want to protect against that. So it's coming down to that CIA where you want to protect its confidentiality, its integrity, and availability to the data. So there's a back end level as well, and then finally the corporate network level. So it's going to protect against the intrusions. If you have you've been infected with some kind of tool that's triggering some kind of denial of service attack or an unauthorized access. So there's the third level of corporate networks, and this would be they have hardware at this level. So this is not just a software like in the second level, but they have hardware servers, like an actual firewall. You hear this term firewall a lot, and a firewall is something that actually protects the data that's going in and out of a particular organization, and it helps protect it. So there's 3 levels. So there's the front end, which is just the authentication, preventing unauthorized access. We've got that back end with primarily just software tools to protect, and then we've got the hardware and the firewall is the third level. What companies have to do is they have to sit down and have to really look at the risk. They do risk analysis on their data. And what that means is they have to look at what if something happened. And they have to come up with all these worst case scenarios. Because if it does happen, how would it impact their business? And it could be catastrophic in some cases. So they have to look at the risk and make a risk assessment plan. Now, you might be involved in one of these in the future by being asked or sitting on a committee, say, well, what kind of risks could happen? And you might say, well, as a user, I get emails that come in. They keep asking me to redirect me to a website and enter in my company's information, giving somebody my access to the company's information. Well, how can the company mitigate that? How can they prevent that type of risk from happening. So there'll be scenarios that will be brought forward in these risk analysis, and then they have to look at each scenario and come up with a mitigation plan to help alleviate that, to help reduce that possibility to the risk. And they'll come up with a plan that's either level 1, level 2, or level 3 to help prevent that. For example, the authentication may have to change. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll send out a broadcast message. Everybody has to change their password because there's been a breach in their data. You probably see these emails in your companies from time to time. This is another risk. Okay, what if there's a power outage? Like, these risks have to be, you really have to think about all these possible risks. What if there's a major power outage? Your data, you're in the middle of working on your system and your power is out, your data can become corrupted. So maybe you need to implement some kind of uninterrupted power supply, your UPS, on your system to at least have enough power to shut down the system safely and protect your data until power is resumed. Another option is redundancy hard drives. They call this a redundancy array of independent disks, a RAID, which means they've got multiple disks copying the same information over and over and over at different locations, possibly in case there's a water catastrophe. What if the sprinkler system went off and flooded out your server room, or if there was a flood or an earthquake or something like that? You want redundancy in your data. You don't want to lose it. Mirroring is another type of redundancy where you can, every time you save a file, that file is not saved on one computer, it's saved on multiple servers in different locations. So if there's ever a catastrophic error, you've got a duplicate copy of it. All right, well, that brings us up to this to these different threats, and I'll save that for the next video.